Well, we've done hypothetical propositions. Here comes the syllogisms. Now, will they be like categorical syllogisms or disjunctive syllogisms? And the answer is yes. Inclusive or there. Because categorical propositions, what is true of categorical propositions? Sorry, categorical syllogisms. What is true of categorical syllogisms? How many propositions are there in a syllogism? 3. How many of the propositions in a categorical syllogism were categorical propositions? 2. That is a bizarre answer. 3. Yes, all 3. So that's why we use the letters to symbolize them. That's why the mood of a categorical syllogism is 3 letters, because each letter represents a categorical proposition. Okay, so in a categorical syllogism, you had 3 categorical propositions. In a disjunctive syllogism, how many of the propositions were disjunctions? Just 1. Okay, so which is it going to be like for hypothetical propositions? I'm sure you're all dying to know. Well, it turns out there are hypothetical propositions that are like hypothetical syllogisms that are like categorical syllogisms in that all 3 are hypotheticals. These we call pure, sounds rather eugenicist, pure hypothetical syllogisms. In a pure hypothetical syllogism, you have 3 hypothetical propositions. I will give you the premises and you tell me the conclusion. Premise 1, if P then Q. Premise 2, if Q then R. Conclusion, if P then R. Remember I told you that hypothetical propositions are like A-type categorical propositions. You better not be cracking your knuckles. Are like A-type categorical propositions. Well, that would make this like an AAA1, which of course is valid. Only I have to change one thing. Well, no, it's an AAA1, so what do I have to do? No, they're in the right order. The Q's are in the right place, but...
If the Q's are in the right place, then I make it a 4.
Oh. The P and R have to be switched.
Well, no. The P and R are in the right place, but something has to be switched. The order of the premises.
That's what I have.
Yeah, because this would be like the major premise, because it contains the equivalent of the major term. And what do we do with the major premise? It goes first. So it would be like... if P then Q goes here, if Q then R goes there, and of course Q is like the middle term, and if you draw a line through it, and you remember your spiky hair, so it looks like AAA 1. If all of that analogy went over your head, it doesn't matter. Okay, but there you go. So this is a pure hypothetical syllogism, and that's the valid form. Okay? That's it for pure hypothetical syllogisms. Not that much to them. Whereas there are also mixed hypothetical syllogisms. And they're just like disjunctive syllogisms, in that there are 4 possibilities, only 2 of which are valid. So, let's say, in all of the cases, the first premise is the hypothetical one. So let's say P, conclusion Q. Oh, incidentally, each of these is given a name. So that's the difference with disjunctive syllogisms. Disjunctive syllogisms, they're boring, they don't get names. Hypothetical syllogisms are exciting, so they get names. And a mixed hypothetical syllogisms are named for what the second premise, the second non-hypothetical premise, does to the first hypothetical premise. What the hell does that mean? Well, I will explain. This one is called affirming the antecedent. Affirming the antecedent. Why? Yes, Don?
The part P is your antecedent, and your second statement, your second preposition, or
Premise.
says P is true.
Yes. So the antecedent of the hypothetical premise is P, and the second premise affirms that that is true. So it is called affirming the antecedent. All right? What's this called? So, not you, Don. What's this called? Affirming the consequent. Yes, it is. In this case, it's agreeing with the consequent. Affirming the consequent. Okay, what's this called? If you're not affirming, what are you doing? Denying. Denying the what? Denying the antecedent. That's what this is called. Denying the antecedent. So, by a process of elimination, what's the last one called? Not you. Denying the consequent. And what is the second premise then of denying? If the first premise is if P then Q, what is the second premise? Not Q. Not because it's denying, and Q because that's the consequent. And the conclusion would be not P. All right. There are 4 of them. Only 2 are valid. Do you think this one is? Who says yes? Sound instincts. Yes, it is. For example, it's saying, if you're a whale, then you're a mammal. You're a whale. What can we conclude? You're a mammal. Now, tell me why this is valid in terms of conditions. Whether necessary or sufficient.
Saying like if whales are mammals, if you're a whale, then you are.
You didn't mention the word sufficient or necessary.
Sufficient.
What's sufficient for what? In every hypothetical proposition, what is sufficient for what?
P is sufficient for Q.
Yeah, the antecedent is sufficient for the consequent. So what?
So whale is a mammal, so it's sufficient.
So P is sufficient for Q, which means that P guarantees you Q. Now that doesn't tell you that either P or Q is true. So for example, it's true to say if I jump off the weather ball, then I'll die. But I'm neither jumping off the weather ball nor dead. It's just telling me that jumping off the weather ball guarantees death. But then this one says you that in fact the antecedent is true. So this one tells you that the antecedent guarantees the consequent, and this one tells you you've got the antecedent. Put the 2 facts together, what does that mean? You've got the consequent. So this one is valid because of sufficient conditions. Is this one valid?
Yes.
All right, we've got a difference of opinion. We've got some yeses, some nos. Let's work it out. Now, what does it mean to say an argument is valid? He asked for the 500th time.
The second for me.
What's that?
The second one has to deny something.
No, that would be the specific rule for disjunctive propositions. I mean in general. And if an argument is valid, what does that mean?
Yeah.
The premises guarantee the conclusion. Now, one way to test that is to come up with a set of circumstances that make the premises true. If you can come up with a set of circumstances where the premises are true, but the conclusion is false, what would that demonstrate? The argument is not valid, because if it was valid, that would be impossible. In a valid argument, if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. Remember the diagram, the Venn diagrams for categorical syllogisms. The reason why that sort of illustrated the premises guaranteeing the conclusion, because the information in the conclusion was already there in the premises. So if you make the premises true, you have already made the conclusion true. So it's impossible for it to be false in a valid argument. All right, so let's see if we can come up with circumstances where this is true, and this is false. If we can, it's invalid. Okay? All right, let's have P stand for you're running a marathon. Q stands for you're alive. What does this say then? If you're running a marathon, then you're alive. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yes, I know there is a fad for zombie marathons now, but they're not really zombies, okay? They're just people in makeup. All right, so if you're running a marathon, then you're alive. True. What does this say then?
You're alive.
Let's say you're the you. Is that true? Yes, by your response, I can tell that it's true.
I seem to be.
So true, true. What does this say? Is that true of you? If you think it is, I have something to break to you. You know, you've misunderstood what a marathon is. So true, true, false, which shows that this argument is invalid. What about this one? Again, let's use the same reasoning. If you're running a marathon, then you're alive. What does this say? You're not running a marathon. That's true. You're not running a marathon. Not even very slowly. Okay, what does this say? You're not alive. Is that true of you?
It's not running a marathon. Killed me.
It's more likely to be the other way around. So, true, true, false, which shows invalid. So this one must be the valid one. Why is it valid?
Because Q can still be true without you doing it.
I don't think that was the reason.
Q is necessary for P.
Yes. What do we know about that? We know that Q is necessary for P. So what? So this says P is sufficient for Q and Q is necessary for P. This says you don't have Q, but we know Q is necessary for P. What does it mean if you don't have a necessary condition? You don't have P. That's right. There's another way you can tell that if this is valid, this has to be valid. Why? Well, what is this equivalent to?
Not Q, not P.
If not Q, then not P, because every hypothetical proposition is equivalent to its contrapositive. But if I replace that, then what kind of argument is this? It's no longer denying the consequent. What is it? It's affirming the antecedent, because it's agreeing with the antecedent, saying the same thing. So if affirming the antecedent is valid, and if you can replace the first premise with its contrapositive, then denying the consequent is going to be valid too. And actually that works between these two. These two are equivalent. This is affirming the consequent, but if I replace it with if not Q then P, then not P, what is it? It's denying the antecedent, the other invalid one. Okay? All right. So what mistakes are being made in these two? In this one, you're mistaking a necessary condition, because Q is a necessary condition for P, for a sufficient. So it would be like saying, if you won the race, then you entered it. You entered the race, so you'll win it. No, sadly not. Or if you're a whale, then you're a mammal. You're a mammal, conclusion, you're a whale. No, being a mammal is a necessary condition for being a whale, but it doesn't guarantee it. It's not a sufficient condition. All right? Okay. Open your books to page 294. All right, Jordan, finally, your time to shine. Number one, please.
If he had even mentioned her name, I would have hit him, but he didn't, so I didn't.
All right. What we have here is, just like we were doing with disjunctive syllogism, I would like you to symbolize it. Then we'll work out whether or what form it is. In this case, we can give it a name, which we couldn't do with disjunctive syllogisms, and then we'll be able to tell if it's valid or not. Okay, so symbolize.
So would that be like, if he had mentioned her name,
So let's say M for mention,
then I would have hit him.
so
H.
then H for hit. Although of course H doesn't stand for hit,
I would have
It stands for I would have hit him because it's a proposition. Yeah. Second premise. No, not
He didn't mention her name.
So what would that be?
Not M.
Not M. Conclusion.
Not H.
Not H. There we go. We've symbolized it. And now we've symbolized it, we can instantly tell the logical form, which is affirming or denying the antecedent or consequent.
Denying the antecedent.
Denying the antecedent, which is valid or invalid? It's invalid. Oh, I forgot to tell you one thing that you don't actually need to know yet, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I forgot to tell you something I didn't need to tell you, which is the valid ones get a special Latin name. The Latin name for affirming the antecedent is?
Modus ponens?
Modus ponens, yes. Modus ponens. Why? I don't know. They just do. Alright? So affirming the antecedent is modus ponens. Only the valid ones are special enough to get Latin names. So the other one that gets a name is denying the consequent. John, do you know what that's called?
Modus tollens.
Modus tollens. There you go. This is one of the ones that doesn't get a fancy Latin name. This is denying the antecedent. So it must be invalid. What is the mistake in this particular argument about mentioning and hitting? Why can it be true that if he mentioned a name I would have hit him, and true that he didn't mention it, and why doesn't that guarantee that there will be no hitting?
Because H isn't necessary.
H is necessary for M, but M isn't necessary for H, right? Which means what?
Well, that's still different.
Yeah, it means that you could be a psycho who hits everybody, or maybe he's just got one of those faces that needs punching. You know those faces? So, that is why that is invalid. All right. Number 2, Eric.
If God had wanted man to fly, he would not have given us Buicks, but he had given us Buicks, therefore.
Yes. What is this an example of? An enthymeme. That is correct. Why? It's missing, actually it's not missing a premise, it's missing a proposition. So what is an enthymeme again?
Syllogism with one hit, one not visible proposition.
Yes, a syllogism with one unstated proposition. So in other words, it's 2 propositions. And this is 2 propositions. The first of which is the conditional. So symbolize that for us, Eric.
If G not B.
Yes, so G stands for God had wanted man to fly, and B stands for God gives us Buicks. So this is if God had wanted us man to fly, he wouldn't have given us Buicks. So what's the second premise?
B.
B. He has given us Buicks. So what's the implied conclusion?
Not G.
Which means
He didn't want us to fly.
God doesn't want us to fly. What kind of argument is that? Which of the 4 types of mixed hypothetical syllogism is it? No, not affirming. It looks like affirming. What if you didn't look at the first proposition? It looks like affirming because there's no tilde there. But it isn't affirming. Why? Because the consequent is not B. Is it agreeing with not B? No, it's disagreeing with not B because it's saying B. B is the denial of not B. B is not B.
So denying the consequent.
Denying the consequent, also known as modus tollens, which means that it is valid. Yes. God does not want us to fly. Has anyone been to the Buick museum in town. It's just next to the FIA. Kind of cool. Yeah, it's got. They had a display of like buses that were really kind of futuristic, and it's worth checking out. Although they only open it rarely, so go on a Saturday. Number 3, Destiny.
If a child is deprived of affection as an infant, they will learn not to expect it. And if they learn not to expect it, they won't seek it out later in life. So if a child is deprived of affection early in life, he won't look for it later on.
A tragic tale indeed. Let's symbolize this. So let's say being given of affection is A, so being deprived of affection is not A. So if not A, then not E, let's say the first proposition is. So if you don't get affection, then you won't expect it. What's the second premise then? The second premise is, if they learn not to expect it, they won't seek it out later in life. So what's that? No, it's E is they do expect it. Not E, so if you learn not to expect it, then what will happen then? Not S, you won't seek it out later in life. What's the tragic conclusion? So, not A, because you're deprived of affection. You're not getting the affection. Then, not S. So if children are deprived of affection, not A, early in life, then they won't look for it later on. What kind of argument is this?
It's pure hypothetical.
It's a pure hypothetical. It's not one of the 4 mixed, because it's a pure hypothetical. Is it valid?
All pure hypotheticals are valid, aren't they?
Not necessarily. I mean, you could come up like, suppose I would say, if A then B, if C then D, therefore if E then F. You know, that would be in some senses a pure hypothetical syllogism, but it's not valid because they're not related. But yes, if there's only one form, and if it fits the one, there's only one valid form, and if it fits the one valid form, then it's valid. And does it fit the one valid form? Yes, because essentially the not E's cancel, and you get if not A, then not S, which is the conclusion. Brian, next one.
If someone had been snooping around here last night, there would be footprints, right? Well, there are, so someone was snooping around last night.
Thank you, Shaggy. We'll get Scooby on it. All right, is the, this is not an enthemy. There's a lot of enthemies here, but this is not one of them. So what's the first premise?
If someone had been snooping around here last night?
If snooping, that's a very Scooby-Doo word, snooping. If S, then
There would be footprints.
F. Second premise. And he would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids. What's that? There are footprints, so?
Someone was snooping around.
Wait a minute, so how do we symbolize that?
F.
F, so conclusion?
S.
S. What type is that?
That is affirming the consequent.
Is that valid?
No.
What's the mistake being made then?
Saying that footprints is necessary for life.
Not saying that it's necessary, it's saying that it's sufficient. So what's the problem?
Somebody could just snoop around.
Well, somebody could have left footprints without snooping around. They could have been left by you when you went out to investigate. There are footprints there, not noticing that they are your footprints. Yes. So even if it's true that if someone had been snooping, there would have been footprints. And it's true that there's footprints, but that doesn't mean that they're the footprints left by someone snooping, because this just says that footprints are necessary for snooping. It doesn't say that footprints are sufficient for snooping. They could have been left some other time. Number 5 is another what, Zach? Enthemy. Okay. What's missing? Which is kind of vital for a hypothetical syllogism. The hypothetical, right? So we've got the second premise and the conclusion. So what is the what is the conclusion? Yes, what is it you're trying to prove? That the battery isn't dead. So, not D. And what's your premise? So let's say L. What is your assumption then in the form of a hypothetical, the missing hypothetical premise? Yes, that would be easy, wouldn't it? Which is what in English? Yeah. So that if you had that, it makes what form? No Latin, please. Affirming or denying the antecedent or consequent. Affirming the antecedent. Suppose so, and we know of course that's valid. It's modus ponens. Supposing instead we wanted to make this denying the consequent, what would our first premise have to be? If this is going to be denying the consequent, what would this have to be? D then not L. That's right, because L would have to be the denial of the consequent, so not L would have to be the consequent. And of course this would be the denial of that. So D then not L, which is what in English? Yes, which is probably more likely what you would say. If the battery is dead, then the lights wouldn't work. All right, number 6. Who's next? You, Nick. Okay. It says, it's raining today, and whenever it rains, the traffic slows to a crawl. Which is another example of an enthymeme. Now, the hypothetical is whenever it rains, the traffic slows to a crawl. What's that in if-then form? No. Because it's saying every time it rains, that guarantees that the traffic will slow to a crawl. Of course, it's not the only reason the traffic will slow to a crawl. You can have accidents and stuff like that. So if R, then C. If rain, then crawl. Now, it's raining today, and whenever it rains, the traffic slows to a crawl. So it's raining today is the other proposition. Is that the second premise or the conclusion? Second premise. So what's the implied conclusion?
Traffic slow to a crawl.
In other words, this is an indirect way of saying the traffic will be crappy because it's raining today, and whenever it rains, the traffic slows to a crawl. Okay, what form is this? Affirming the antecedent, which means that it is
True.
not true. Truth is a value of propositions. Valid. Thank you. Yes.
Couldn't think of a word.
It's an important word. Okay. Number 7, Charvel.
What if you did want to marry him, then you wouldn't be running around.
Wait a minute. So read the whole thing first.
I don't think you really do want to marry him. If you did, you wouldn't be running around with other men the way you have been.
Don't you judge me. All right. So this is another enthymeme. What is the if-then statement?
If you really want to marry him, you wouldn't be running around with other men.
So that would be if M, then not R, let's say, not running around. Now, I don't think you really do want to marry him. Is that the conclusion or the second premise? That's the conclusion. So you don't want to marry. So what's the implied second premise, which this person has said because they're being discreet? This person hasn't said because they're being discreet. But everybody knows it. I am running around with other men, apparently. Yes. What form is that?
consequences, but
It involves the consequent. Is it agreeing with the consequent or disagreeing with it? Disagreeing. So it's no. What's the name? It's not disagreeing with the consequent. It's called. It starts with a D.
yeah.
It's not affirming. It's
No.
denying the consequent, which means that it is.
Valid.
Which means that it is valid. Valid. It's valid. It's modus tollens.
So you don't want us to say the denying the consequent or what is
For the purpose of the midterm denying the consequent, only thereafter will I expect you to know modus ponens and modus tollens. There'll come a point when you have to use those as rules of validity, and then you will memorize them, but you don't have to. The number 9 is boring. Let's do number 10. Back to you, Kat.
Number 10?
Yes.
Unless we adopt this proposal, the company will go bankrupt, so we must adopt the proposal.
Okay. So what is that? So this is one where the hypothetical proposition is in non-standard form. You have to put it in standard form first. Well, let's not do that first. Let's just say A for adopt unless B. So you can have, no, actually that's wrong, isn't it? Duh. It's unless A, comma B. That's what it is. So, what's the second proposition, second premise? We don't know, because this is an nth mean. What is the conclusion? What is the, yes, it's A, right? I'm not doing a good job with this one. Okay, so the first premise is, unless we adopt this proposal, the company will go bankrupt. That's unless A, comma B. The second premise is unstated, but the conclusion, so, we must adopt the proposal. What do you think the missing premise is? It's unstated because it's so horrible, or it's so obvious. What don't we want to happen?
Don't want the company to go bankrupt.
So how would we say that?
So like not be.
Not B. Now, so that'll be the second premise and that will be the conclusion. Can we tell what type this is yet? No. You can't tell what type it is until you put this into standard form. Because it might turn out that this is not the antecedent, this might end up as the consequent or whatever. You have to put it in standard form first before you can tell what type it is. What is that in standard form? If not A, then B, because what's the trick with unless? It's equivalent to if not.
It's tricky, I didn't know backwards.
So it would be if not A, then B. If that's the, if this is the argument, what form is it kept? Denying the consequent, which means that it is valid. Alternatively, what could we have said that was equivalent to this?
B then.
No.
If not B.
If not B, then A. Remember, you flip the contrapositive, you flip them, so, and you negate them. So B becomes not B, and not A becomes A, and then they switch positions. And if it was that, what would the argument be? Affirming the antecedent, also valid. All right. One more amazing fact for you that will boggle your mind. Yes?
We have a question like this in the homework, or we can choose either.
You won't have one like that in the homework, but you might have one like that, in fact almost certainly will, in the midterm, and either answer is right, because they're equivalent. here's an amazing fact for you. Every hypothetical, besides being equivalent to another hypothetical by contrapositive, is also equivalent to a disjunction, and vice versa. So you can convert between or statements and if then. They are logically equivalent, or there is a logical equivalent. I will illustrate with an example ripped from my real life. I used to live in Los Angeles, and I would drive around listening to the rock station, and they said on the radio, I don't know why I remember this, it's such a stupid example, but I do. They said, either you don't love Aerosmith, which I don't, either you don't love Aerosmith, or you'll want these tickets that they were giving away to an Aerosmith show. This was while they were still able to walk, before they were about 19. Okay. What if-then statement is equivalent to that?
If you love Aerosmith, then you want these tickets.
If you love Aerosmith, then you want these tickets. That is just a strange way of saying, if you love Aerosmith, then you want these tickets. So they're equivalent. Now notice, what is this equivalent to then? No? What's that? Not P or Q. So not P or Q. Is that a valid disjunctive syllogism? What's the rule with disjunctive syllogism? How do you tell if it's valid? The second one must deny one of the disjuncts. Does it deny one of the disjuncts? Yes, it does, because this is not P and it's saying P. So this, well, obviously this has to be valid, because I've just said this is logically equivalent to it. So if the original argument was valid, then this would have to be valid too. Whereas this one, of course, is going to be invalid. And it is invalid if you know that it's not P or Q. If you know that it's Q, that doesn't rule out not P, because with inclusive or, they could both be true. All right? So you can convert between disjunctive, and basically what you do is you negate the first one, whichever way you're going. So if you're starting with if L, then T, you negate the first one and change it to an or if you're converting the other way, then you negate the first one, so it becomes not L, which is equivalent to L, and you're back where you started. So the way to convert them is to negate the first one and then change it from an or to an arrow, or vice versa. Now, I have taught you all I'm going to teach you before what momentous event on Wednesday? The midterm. Dun, dun, dun. Now, you might want to know what the midterm is going to look like. It's going to look like this. There. Now, you probably want to know a little more than that, or a little more specifics. So, let me say a little bit more. The first thing I will say, and this is probably the most important thing, is bring a scantron. You will need a scantron. Not all of the exam will be on a scantron, but roughly 35% will.
The library gives them out for free, right?
The library gives them out for free. Does anyone not know what a scantron is? Okay, so you've come across them in your academic career. I want the skinny kind, the long skinny kind, not the full page ones, the usual kind. And the library gives them away for free. You can buy a pack at the bookstore for a nominal sum, or also the Office of Student Life in UM-Flint gives them away for free. Just go to the university centre and go around knocking on doors and saying, give me a scantron, and eventually somebody will. Okay? Probably because they think you're threatening them. But no, they do actually have stacks of free ones. All right. So, the midterm will be out of 100 points. You want to know the point breakdown, probably. You don't have a breakdown. 35 points will be on multiple choice questions. That's what you need the scantron for. The rest will look a bit like this, where you fill it in on the paper. Now you will notice that the entire first sheet is, well, what are these? Venn diagrams for what kind of thing? Categorical syllogisms. So 31 points right there is categorical syllogism stuff. Make sure you know that. So you will be given, in one example, you will be given a categorical syllogism in words. You know, like all whales are mammals, or you know, all chihuahuas are dogs, all dogs are mammals, so therefore all chihuahuas are mammals. Something like that, only much harder. That would be too easy. And probably it won't be in standard form for categorical proposition. So it'll be something like every whale is a mammal, and you have to turn that into an A-type. And once you do that, you have to write it out in standard form. So you would say all P are M, you know, some S are M conclusion, some S are P, something like that. And you would have to say, in this case, P is whales, or S is mammals, or whatever, right? So you would have to recognize what the terms stand for, write it out using letters, and then you have to identify the Boolean figure, like AAA1. And then you have to diagram it, and use the diagram to tell whether or not it's valid. You also need to know the rules for validity. I'm not going to give you them on the exam. You have to remember them. I will give you this opportunity though. If you tattoo them permanently on your flesh, then you can read them off that. Nobody's taken me up on this. Although I think that would be a pretty cool tattoo. So that's categorical syllogisms. About 16 points out of 100 will be diagramming an argument. Remember the Mutant Ninja Turtle ones? So it'll be somewhere between the Mutant Ninja Turtle one and the Alice one. So you have to break it down into individual propositions. You have to write them out fully, replacing words like this and that with what they refer to, omitting indicator words. So you make a list of propositions and then you diagram it so that it looks something like this, you know. You know, something like that. Remember that stuff? You hated that stuff. Well, too bad. It's going to be on the exam. Then there will be stuff about just like what we've just been doing. Hypothetical syllogisms written in words that you have to then symbolize and identify and tell whether they're valid or not. That's the write-on part. The multiple choice one will have, you know, it'll be much fewer points per type of thing, but there will be just about everything. So, too broad, too narrow with definitions. Remember that? You'll have to know that. Assert and express. Remember that? You'll have to know that. Even relative clauses. There'll be a couple of points on that. You know, what are the two kinds of relative clause? Exactly. So you better look it up. Restrictive and non-restrictive is the answer. Then there'll be easy stuff like examples of sentences. You have to identify the ones that express a proposition and the ones that don't. What type of sentences do not express propositions? I just gave you an example. Questions. Also, get this right. I just gave you an example. Commands. Yes. Remember that stuff? It was way back at the beginning. Haven't we learned a lot? Well, have we learned it? We'll find out. Then there'll be a few questions like this. So, you know, you'll be given a sentence and you will say that this is like dogs and this is like stinky things, and then you will have to say, well, which one of these represents some dogs are stinky, which one represents no non-dogs or non-stinky things, that kind of thing. Okay?
Can you make it easier than the homework?
The homework is easy. No, it's not possible. I'm sorry. That's as easy as it gets.
Is there a study guide at all?
The study guide is this. It's a very good study guide. And also the handouts that I've done. That would probably be a more condensed version. If you go to the handouts page.
Are there going to be like define this term kind of questions? Like what is an affirming?
No.
How many questions
See, that question is a totally pointless question, so I'm not going to answer you. I will tell you that it's going to be worth 100 points total, but whether or not it's one question worth 100 points or 100 questions worth 1 point doesn't matter.
So we're just going to get like our regular entire class time?
Yes, yes you are, and you will need it, so make sure you don't come late. Finally, there will also be examples with disjunctive syllogisms, you have to recognize that it's disjunctive. Oh yeah, and also a few examples of where you're tested on your knowledge of converse, obverse, and contrapositive. What is the obverse of all whales and mammals? No.
Sorry.
Obverse.
No.
No. All whales and mammals becomes no. Whales are non-mammals. Yes. The contrapositive to all whales and mammals is all non-mammals are non-whales. Very good.